When the city lights of Lagos glittered like a scattered handful of stars, the Cairo mansion sat on its hill like a small, private moon. Abdul Cairo, a man who had turned a timber trade into an empire of shipping, hotels, and cosmetics, lived there with everything money could buy: paintings from Paris, rugs from Marrakesh, and a staff roster that could fill a small village. He had that quiet, imperious air of someone used to being obeyed. His son, Malik, was a different kind of star, bright, fast, and a little dangerous. At 18, he had the dangerous mixture of privilege and boredom. Malik's mischief started as pranks, switching sugar for salt in the kitchen, releasing peacocks into the guest dining room, but quickly slid into cruelty. He teased the girls at the exclusive school he attended, filmed them with his phone to mock later, chased the neighborhood vendors with borrowed cars, and burned through pocket money as fast as his father could transfer it. The maids whispered about him, and the gardeners avoided his path. He was never punished. When Malik broke something, Abdul would smile sadly and buy a new version. When Malik humiliated a classmate, Abdul would counsel forgiveness and buy Malik a trip abroad to learn. Wealth had a way of rewiring consequence into indulgence. Amina, Abdul's wife, watched this from the margins, like a cartographer mapping a slow-moving disaster. She was not flashy. She wore simple dresses, kept the household ledger like a hymn book, and asked questions people with power forgot to ask. Who cleans the dining hall after the guests leave? How much do the schoolgirls' families borrow to meet tuition? When she asked, no one gave her the slick evasions Abdul accepted. She saw the ripple effect of indulgence, the trace of hurt in the faces Malik left behind, and the way Abdul turned away from it because it made him uncomfortable. One evening, after Malik teased a visiting cousin so terribly she ran from the house crying, Amina decided it was time to act. She could not simply scold Malik. He would shrug and charm his way out. She could not rail at Abdul. He loved his son. So she chose a path that did not shout, but moved like a stream, steady, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Amina invited a few of the household staff for tea, not to scold, but to listen. She asked them to tell true stories, little things Malik had done that the family had smoothed over. The gardener spoke of the time Malik drove a wheelbarrow into the vegetable patch. The cook recalled how Malik had slapped a girl's phone out of her hand. The chauffeur spoke about being mocked because he had to be up at 4 a.m. to fuel the cars. Amina wrote down every story, not to punish, but to show Abdul the map of damage he'd been ignoring. When she presented the list to Abdul, she did it like an accountant presenting a balance sheet. There were no accusations, only evidence. Abdul read the list, his fingers tracing words that described things he had assumed were youthful excess. I was protecting him, he said finally. From what? Amina asked. From the world, he replied. She shook her head. From consequences, she said. Abdul's first reaction was to offer excuses. But there was a look in Amina's face he recognized, the same look that had steadied him when markets crashed and banks threatened. It was quiet, firm, and without judgment. For the first time that season, Abdul felt the ground shift beneath his assumptions. He agreed, reluctantly, to let Amina try something different.
Amina's plan wasn't dramatic theater. It was simple: accountability, wrapped in exposure to the world Malik ignored. First, she withdrew Malik's allowances and access to the family fleet. That alone sent Malik into an adolescent brand of fury and pleading. But Amina stayed calm. Money, she told him one afternoon, is a tool for making life possible, or a shield that cuts you off from it. I want you to learn the first. Next, she enrolled Malik in a community program she had quietly funded for years, a center that taught carpentry, basic accounting, and mentorship from local entrepreneurs. It wasn't punishment. It was what money could not buy: perspective. Malik laughed at first. He wore the center's plain shirt and thought he would be the star. But his hands, spoiled by ivory-lounged comfort, had to learn to hold real tools. The first board he sawed twisted crookedly. The bench she attempted collapsed. There were other lessons. There were other lessons. Amina arranged for Malik to spend a day each week at a girls' scholarship foundation she supported. There, he listened. He listened to teachers who worked 2 jobs, to mothers who walked miles to pay school fees, to girls who had lost fathers to illness and had no one to call when mocked. He heard about dignity worn thin by necessity. The stories lodged under his ribs like stones. At home, Amina changed the house's rhythm. She gave Malik chores, mend the fence he had once broken, helped the cook prepare a meal for the staff, personally apologized to the cousin he had humiliated. Abdul watched his son struggle through tasks he had always sidestepped. Watching Malik's cheeks flesh as he labored made Abdul feel something he had not felt in years. Responsibility. Change rarely arrives neatly. Malik slipped back once, posting a mocking video that made the rounds online. The backlash hit the family brand. Advertisers asked questions, old friends whispered. Abdul, who had always smoothed things with cash and charm, felt his power wobble. He could have bought silence. Instead, the humiliation the family felt opened a new door. Abdul called Malik into his study. The room was lined with books. But on the desk that day lay a single, small object, a wooden toy car Malik had carved at the community center. Grainy and imperfect, it was the product of a day when Malik's fingers had worked with honest effort. Abdul placed the toy in Malik's hands. "You made this?" he asked. Malik nodded, ashamed. Abdul surprised them both. "Good work is the kind that keeps its maker honest," he said quietly. "I have been making mistakes, son. I bought away consequences because I feared losing you. In doing so, I taught you that nothing matters but the immediate feeling. That was wrong." The confession was small, but it trembled with truth. Amina had prepared for this. She suggested a family gesture. Abu, the father, and Malik would spend 2 months working in the community projects Amina supported. Not as observers, as workers, side by side with those they had only seen from afar. The idea terrified Abdul. But when the board of one of his hotels threatened to pull sponsorship unless the family took visible steps to repair reputation, he agreed. The 2 months were humbling. Abdul's suit was replaced by a dust-streaked shirt. Malik's phone lay silent in a locker for days. They worked, repainting classrooms, delivering food parcels, listening to stories of hardship and resilience. Abdul met women who ran businesses with no capital, men who mended windows for a living and smiled as if joy were not a function of bank accounts. He met a young teacher who had once been helped by a scholarship his company now funded. The teacher's gratitude was simple and indiscriminate, and it unsettled Abdul more than any compliment from a boardroom. Something shifted inside him. He saw the human price of charity that came with press releases rather than partnerships. He saw Malik's shame transform into respect when a girl he had once mocked sought him out to say simply, "I forgive you." Malik's apology was clumsy, but real. The girl's forgiveness was not theatrical. It was like water pouring on a small fire, making it possible to rebuild. When they returned to the mansion, not everything was fixed. Malik still had fits of vanity. Abdul still missed the old safety of wealth. But the rituals had changed. Meals were sometimes shared with staff at the family table. Malik paid for his own school books. Abdul began a small fund for employee education and insisted that the company measure its social impact, not just its profit margins. A year later, at a neighborhood festival, Malik presented the toy car he had carved to the girl he had once humiliated as a token of goodwill. The crowd cheered less for spectacle and more for the visible arc of change. Amina watched from the back, hands folded, not smug, but satisfied. She had not forced spectacular conversion. She had set up a chain of small truths and let them do their work. In the quiet after the celebration, Abdul took Amina's hand and said, "You made me see what my money could not buy." She smiled. "You made him see," she replied, and looked at their son, who was teaching a group of boys how to sand a plank without splinters. There was patience in his voice now, and the memory of 2 months sweating beside people who wanted nothing from him but his honest labor. The mansion's lights still gleamed, but now the house had other lights inside. The warm glow of a family learning to be accountable, the bright small lamps of people choosing everyday kindness. Wealth had not vanished. It had simply found limits. And in those limits, a better story began.